Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Jack Calderini. I am the director of the digital integrations team. We are the team responsible for setting up conversion tracking for all of our digital marketing campaigns and any Zapier integrations to send lead data to our CRMs. Excited to be here, and thank you all for joining. Anderson?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Anderson Murphy, Vice President of Data Intelligence. I oversee our data intelligence group, focusing on all things marketing measurement, so heavily involved in this topic on a daily basis. Here's a quick look at our agenda that we're going to cover today. So first, we'll talk about the landscape of digital privacy. Then we'll go into privacy and consent, third-party cookie deprecation, and then getting prepared and what you can do to take action today. So first, starting with the digital privacy landscape, I remember when GDPR first rolled out back in 2018, and it was a mad scramble from many marketers to figure out A, if they needed to comply, or B, what they needed to do, if so, but also simultaneously hoping that such a regulation never came to the US, because it was such a just such a worry that we were going to lose everything important to us as digital marketers. And the truth is, it hasn't happened here yet in the US at that capacity. But what it's left us with is this map of state level legislation, which now has me in the opposite camp of wishing that back then we did have our own digital privacy legislation at a national level. Because now you can see this is a map from the International Association of Privacy Professionals showing us that all of the states that either have currently in legislation have enacted their own privacy bills or have already passed, and which ones are in effect. All of these are similar but different in many ways, which can make it complex for sure. So this is 17 states that have enacted their own privacy legislation, with 2 others waiting for signature. My home state of Maine up there in the top right, a bill there just died in the legislature. So we won't be getting our own privacy legislation anytime soon, but many of the other states here as well. So 19 in total. And really what these mean is that every state is giving us slightly different privacy legislations, and as it relates to digital privacy that we have to comply with or think about. In general, they cover 2 specific areas. One is giving consumers certain rights. The other is putting certain obligations onto businesses to comply with those rights and regulations. So first, kind of covering the right to access. And this is certainly not comprehensive of everything that is included in all of these bills. And like I said, they're all very different. And we're also not lawyers, so take this as more just general information rather than legal advice. But first, kind of covering the right to access on the consumer rights side of things. This is really a right for a consumer to be able to access their data from a business or a data controller, and just be able to understand what it is that business or data controller owns for information about them. These bills also give the consumers the right to request that incorrect or outdated personal information be corrected, but not deleted, or they give the consumers the right to request that their personal information be deleted as well. They also give the user or the consumers the right to opt out of certain processing as well. So this is, there are 2 different things, and this is where some of the differences of the bills get tricky, where the most common of these different enacted bills have the right to opt out of processing, which means that consumers are by default opted in, but they need to have the ability to be able to opt out of profiling for targeted advertising purposes, for example. But in some cases, there are much stricter interpretations or regulations set within some of these bills where opt-in consent is required. So by default, consumers are opted out of profiling or targeted advertising, and they have to physically opt in by clicking a button in order to be reached with targeted advertising. So there's clearly a myriad of different rules and regulations within these, which can make it challenging to navigate. On the business side of things, the two most common things that are in here are notice / transparency requirements. So this is an obligation placed on a business to provide notice to consumers about certain data practices, privacy operations, or privacy programs. So think of notice as like as like a cookie consent banner that may pop up on the website, or a privacy policy that you have linked. It tells the consumer what you're collecting about them, what you're doing with it, and in general about your overall privacy operations. These bills also have an opt-in default requirement age, which again varies. This essentially is a restriction that forces businesses to treat consumers under a certain age with an opt-in default. So the most common is 13, meaning that anyone under the age of 13 by default is required to opt in before any of their personal information can be sold. But some of these states have gotten extremely strict and require it for all ages. So every single individual must opt in to have their personal information sold before it can be sold by a business. So you may be thinking, kind of going back to our map here, that if you're at an institution up there in Massachusetts, that some of these rules and regulations may not apply to you because they are from other states. But in reality, these regulations affect or are applied to all of their citizens. So if you're targeting and reaching consumers from other states, such as Connecticut or Vermont or New Hampshire, or even California, Texas, then these are rules and regulations that you have to think about. I will also say that, again, prefacing this with that we're not lawyers, many of these legislations do put certain exceptions into the laws for some business types, and many of those business types are nonprofits, and some even explicitly mention that higher education institutions are exempt. So before you take action to understand what you need to do, first thing would always be to consult with your legal counsel to understand if any of these rules and regulations are applicable to you or not. Moving on to some foreign legislation, again, mentioning GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, but also introducing the Digital Markets Act here. So again, many of you are probably familiar with GDPR, and like I said, it went into effect in 2018. And that primarily required businesses to adhere to consumer privacy requirements, similar to the same requirements that we just talked through, specifically for citizens of the European Union. So whether or not these were citizens specifically located in the EU, or if they were traveling abroad, or if they were over in the US temporarily, the law applied to every single EU citizen, giving those consumer rights to all of those citizens. In 2023 throughout to March 2024, a new law took effect called the Digital Markets Act. And this was really sort of a bolt-on to GDPR. And it was a landmark piece of legislation that was really aiming to regulate large online platforms and kind of ensure fair competition among them all. And this was a landmark because it was really for the first time, not just putting the onus on individual businesses to comply, but making sure that those businesses that might be utilizing other online or other large online platforms like Google, like Meta, that they are responsible and have to comply as well. And they did this through a new term called gatekeepers. So the DMA established this criteria for identifying large online platforms as gatekeepers. And these are companies like Meta, like Google, that wield significant power and influence. So this really set out new rules for the collection, use, and storage of personal data, and put stringent regulations onto those companies because of that. So whether or not some of these US laws apply to you or GDPR applies to you, Digital Markets Act affects gatekeepers, which is naturally making them enforce some of their own rules on you as an individual advertiser. So for example, if you now, as of March 2024, want to do personalized advertising to anyone in the European Union, you can't do that unless you have cookie consent enabled and you're passing consent signals to Google to understand, so that it can understand who exactly that's accessing your website has opted into personalized advertising and who has not. So previously, that was just up to you to decide whether you needed to comply with GDPR. Now, Google is forcing you to comply whether or not any of those laws apply to you. But it's not just government regulation that's affecting the privacy landscape either. There are several software and tech providers that have also been getting into the game. Whether it's because they're truly passionate about consumer privacy and data security, or they're in it for their own competitive advantage, I'll leave up to you to decide. But it's happening either way, and we all have to adapt as digital marketers because of that. So just to name a few, and we'll get into more detail of some of these later on, but some of these logos may be familiar. Chrome, obviously deprecating third-party cookies, which we'll touch on more later for sure. DuckDuckGo is a privacy-first search engine and browser that promises to never track you. Edge, Safari, Firefox, those are browsers that have already severely depreciated the effectiveness of third-party and first-party cookies. And then, of course, Apple, which has really shaken up the marketing industry many different times over the last several years with things like intelligent tracking prevention, mail privacy protection for all you email marketers. I'm sure you're familiar with that, as well as IP obfuscation and more. So, like I said, whether or not any of the previously mentioned domestic or foreign legislation applies to you, big tech is deciding to change the game as well in terms of privacy, and is going to force you to adapt.
Right, and so moving on from some of the kind of external factors, let's talk about some ways that you, as the businesses, can give people the option to control and monitor their own data. And so before we get started, just wanted to go through a couple types of consumer data that we'll be referring to throughout the rest of this presentation. So we have zero-party, first-party, second-party, and third-party data. Zero-party data is information that's intentionally shared with a brand. So think about data points that are shared through an RFI form. First-party data tends to be, it's also knowingly shared, but it's tends to be more behavioral, more contextual. So think about some demographics or pages that have visited, or interests based off of website behavior. So that's more of someone saying, listen, I know you're tracking my web activity, and I'm okay with that. Second party data is zero party or first party data that's intentionally shared with one brand and then sold or shared directly to another brand. So if you think about College Express, for those of you here that use that, or if you purchase any search list, we have one brand that is grabbing names, and then you as a different brand are purchasing that from them directly. And then we have third-party data, which is collected from various sources and aggregated, and typically is sold in marketplaces. That primarily has been the foundation for all of our interest-based targeting across most platforms. So that's how we're able to find that someone is interested in chickens and gardening, just because all that data has been aggregated in a third party. I did want to mention zero party and first party. Most people kind of combine those together, and zero party might be a new term for some people. It is a relatively new term. It was coined by Forrester Research in 2018. And so, some people may say first party, some people may say zero party. And so we like to make the distinction of the two different kinds. And so how is first party and third party data collected? It is collected through cookies. And what are cookies? Cookies are a small piece of text that is sent to your browser from the website, and it contains information related to your visit. So that could contain tracking information. It could contain preferences based off of your website activity or items in your cart. And cookies are everywhere. They're used by every kind of website in all sorts of different kinds of ways. And so if cookies are available, they're being used all over the place, then how do we give users the option to control that? We do that through cookie consent. Cookie consent is the process of obtaining either implied or explicit permission from visitors to allow cookies to exist on a website based off of their pre-selected preferences. And so why do we need this? People expect it, really. According to a study from Deloitte, 65% of users express concern over the amount of cookie usage and really want to have more control over it. We live in a digital age where online trust has become such a big factor, and people want to trust a brand. They want to know that a brand is concerned with their data. And so we can give users the ability to control the cookies that are being placed, stored, and remembered by consent banners. And so a lot of you here, I'm sure, have consent banners, I'm sure you've seen them, and they run the gamut as to what they are and how they're written, what they collect. Again, we cannot provide legal advice. This is just some examples of the 4 most common consent banners that are out there and how they work. So the first one, we'll call it opt-in. And so going back to some of the legislation that Anderson had mentioned, this is one that would be used if you are in a situation that requires explicit opt-in. And so that's a situation where someone comes to the website, there are no cookies present until they clicked accept. And so that means that they come to the website, there's no retargeting pixel grabbing these people, putting them in the audience. If they fill out an RFI form, they're not being captured because cookies don't exist. Also, depending on how you configure it, by ignoring this banner, that's kind of the same thing as declining, because if it's a situation where explicit opt-in is needed and they ignore it, that's not opting in. Again, this is the strictest version of cookie consent. Opt out. So this is a situation where cookies are enabled by default, but you can opt out. So it's saying, hey, our cookies are here. We're capturing your data, but if you want to opt out, you can. And so that's a fairly common one that we see. Mixed consent is interesting and provides more flexibility, but also tends to lead to some more customization. So this allows users to customize the types of cookies that are being stored on their browser. And so there are 4 types of cookies that generally exist, and you may hear them talked about in different ways, but the 4 types of cookies are necessary, functional, marketing, and analytics. So necessary would be ones that you need that needs to be on the website to run, for the website to work. Functional is things that allow you to improve your user experience. So to help keep things personalized, to help keep things in your cart, for example. Marketing is exactly what that is. So being able to track conversions, be able to track retargeting. And analytics would be more related to exactly that. So being able to track users through Google Analytics, through Google Search Console, things like that. If that type of banner is of interest, a lot of the cookie management platforms that we see and work with, like Asana, OneTrust, CookieBot, a lot of those work with that and kind of help customize and help build out that customization and the logic behind it on the back end. Finally, informational is the one that we tend to see a lot in higher ed, which is just kind of like, cookies are here. By using this website, you agree to be cookied. And it doesn't give users that level of control, which again might be okay depending on your legal situation. Users can customize their cookies on the browser level, so they can choose to decline third-party cookies or whatever they decide is best in their personal browser settings. So I found this cartoon in preparing for this presentation that I thought was really funny and insightful. So I come from a camp of kind of a cynical marketing IT standpoint of like, I don't want people to track me. Don't place cookies. I want my data private. And I think maybe a lot of us here on the call agree with that mentality. But cookies can be helpful. They help really create a personalized experience on the website, so they can remember a login. They can remember that you had shown an interest in certain pages. And so we know there's tons of studies about how more and more frequently people want a personalized experience, and so cookies help lead to that personalized experience. And so there's this kind of push-pull mentality I find myself struggling with. But really, cookies are not going away. They're being limited, but I think they'll be here for a long time. And so what happens if someone denies cookies? So from a marketing standpoint, there's a couple things that we can do. So one is that GA4 can be configured to model sessions where where cookies and consent is denied. And so that can help mitigate some of the potential data loss. Again, it's using AI and machine learning to help model some of that to see really so that we don't lose that kind of data. We can also set up offline and enhanced conversions to make up for some of that data loss that we have seen for conversion tracking. Offline conversions is the idea of taking some of the offline data that exists and happens in Slate and uploading it back to the platform. So a good example of what we do with that is we can take a list of people that have been accepted and enrolled, take that zero-party data, upload it back to the platform, and then the platform can then look at I see this email and this phone number. This is associated with a profile, like a Google profile or a Meta profile. And I can see that this profile interacted with an ad and then went on to be enrolled, accepted. So then we can now get that conversion. That is a completely cookieless solution that we've seen have a lot of success. Enhanced conversions is a similar idea. This can help mitigate some of the conversion lost for some of the tag-based conversions. So what that does is that we're able to configure a Google Tag Manager to capture and upload some of that, again, that zero-party data that is being submitted in a web form, re-upload that back to the platforms. And so then the platforms can say, it's similar idea where they can say, hey, I see this email is associated with this profile. They engaged with this campaign and completed this action. So now we can count that as a conversion. That's something that is going to be increasingly more prevalent. In a recent webinar I watched, Google said that they saw a 5% increase in conversion rates on search campaigns by enabling enhanced conversions, and a 17% increase in conversion rates for YouTube campaigns. And our remarketing audiences could shrink. Again, if people are denying cookies, then their retargeting cookie, it won't be there. So people will not be added to the retargeting audience. One myth that I did want to share is that people don't have to accept cookies to use a website. I was talking to my mom about this presentation, actually, and she was like, I thought that if I denied cookies, then I couldn't use a website. And I was like, that's an interesting thought. I personally had never thought of that. But it turns out 24% of people believe that they can't use a website if they opt out of cookies. I think that for most of our users, which are, high school students or just generally younger students, they probably know that that's not the case, but maybe they don't. And so that might be something to think about as you're crafting your language for a consent banner of if you can still use the website even if you opt out. And so let's talk about third-party cookie deprecation. And so before we move on, I do want to just clarify one thing. So again, we're talking about deprecation of just third-party cookies in the context of Google Chrome. Anderson mentioned previously that, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but different browsers have different rules and regulations that have already been implemented for their cookie control. But when you see information about the death of the third-party cookie, that is just about Google Chrome and just the third-party cookie. So if you see or hear anyone talking about the death of all cookies, don't take advice from them anymore. Don't take marketing advice. Maybe their life advice is good. And so again, first-party data and third-party data is captured by cookies. And so those are captured respectively by first-party cookies and third-party cookies. First-party cookies are placed by the domain that you're on. Third-party cookies are placed by other domains, so some of those data aggregators that I mentioned. First-party cookies are intended to exist only on that domain, and so they won't track you to other websites. Third-party cookies are intended to track you across multiple domains. So again, cookies are small pieces of text placed on your browser, and so because it exists in the browser, it can follow you to other websites. First-party cookies are really designed to help improve the user experience, whereas third-party cookies typically are designed for data collection to help create some of those audience targeting capabilities. So an example of thinking about first-party versus third-party cookies, let's say, so I was in the business for looking for a brand new chicken coop. And so I was, looking on Amazon for a chicken coop. I had a couple of them saved in my cart. Next thing I know, I'm on the Weather Channel, looking at how hot it's going to be in New England today. And I start seeing ads for chicken coops on weather.com. And so first-party cookies allow for that data about my chicken coop that I added to the cart to be saved in that cart. It's data from Amazon intended to stay on Amazon. But the third-party cookie, which again goes from site to site, allows for some of that retargeting and some of those external ads to be seen because they're not from they're not from weather.com, they're from amazon.com. And so this little link here at the bottom is I think pretty interesting. Again, this presentation will be shared at the end. And so it can show you, if you're interested, to kind of look at what cookies exist on your particular browser. And so you can look, website by website to see what cookies are there, and you can kind of get an idea of how many of these are first party and how many of these are third party cookies.
So third-party cookies, they're going away again, from the lens of Chrome deprecating them, but also from Safari and some of the other browsers severely restricting them, mainly going away due to just growing concerns of user privacy infringement. And this is definitely exacerbated by GDPR, as that went worldwide. In its notoriety, and then CCPA as well made it famous and just brought more general awareness to how much advertisers and big tech are tracking every individual across the internet. And so there's been just overall general consumer pressure for more regulation in this area, which is one reason, but also third-party cookies pose a significant data security risk. So if you remember back to, I think it was the late 2010s when Facebook at the time had the Cambridge Analytica data leak, that was a third-party data provider to them that they were using to allow their advertisers to have better targeting capabilities. And when that data leaked, that was millions of users' private data that had now been accessible to other individuals. And for those exact reasons, it can be prone to malicious use by bad actors as well, because it can be used in cross-site context. It's more open for bad actors to be able to hack into and grab. And then these are, in general, these are cookies that most internet users don't know exist, and they don't know to what extent that these cookies are tracking them everywhere. And so that's why some of these private companies are also taking action here as well. All right, so back to Chrome in terms of when they're going away, but also thinking of some of the other browsers that we talked about as well. So first, speaking to Chrome specifically, this timeline down here shows when they were supposed to go away and when they're now being deprecated. So it was first 2021, then 2023, then most recently it was supposed to happen the end of this year, and now they've been pushed again to 2025. And the main reason for that was not because Google wasn't ready this time. It has introduced several different APIs that can act for ad measurement and targeting in place of third-party cookies. But there was some concerns from the United Kingdom's Competition and Markets Act, or sorry, Competition and Markets Authority, that felt like with this move of deprecating third-party cookies to these open APIs, that they were even just creating their own bigger monopoly within themselves, and the walled garden that they own of data was becoming even larger. And so in an effort to kind of going back to the Digital Markets Act and ensuring that these gatekeepers are providing fair competition amongst their competitors, they recommended that Google halt it and delay it further. And so they are doing that to comply until 2025. But again, digging a little bit more deeper into this, just because Chrome is delaying their third-party cookie deprecation doesn't mean that you're off the hook and that nothing is, or that third-party cookies are still here and that they're great and being used everywhere. When we think about other browsers, Safari in particular, they block all third-party cookies unless a storage API is, the storage access API is used. And that API is essentially a little banner that pops up if you're on Safari, and it will say, do you want to allow X website to be able to track you across the internet? And if you say no, then they're blocked. If you say yes, then they're allowed. But I rarely see any websites actually implementing that. And so in essence, unless you have that storage access API used, all third-party cookies are already blocked on Safari. First-party cookies are also restricted, heavily restricted on Safari. They're restricted to just 24 hours of life when the referrer of that user is a known tracker. So if a user is clicking on a Google Ads PPC campaign in the Google search, getting to the website, they came from Google, a known tracker. That first-party cookie that is being set on their browser is now has just 24 hours of life to it, unless they decide to come back to the website on their own within that 24-hour period, which it can then be extended. Similarly, Firefox blocks all third-party cookies from known trackers, so they don't outright block them all, but only the ones from known trackers. But all the other third-party cookies that are set that aren't from known trackers are partitioned and cannot be used in a cross-site context. So cannot be used for retargeting, for example, like Jack was talking about, because when you're reaching somebody on weather.com, that's a third-party site. And then first-party cookies from known trackers, again, are purged daily. And so that known trackers term is something that you've heard me say quite a few times during that. And there's essentially kind of an open source framework that identifies the trackers that are prevalent across major websites across the internet and categorizes which pixels and which trackers across the internet are known. And well, essentially that's a list that is always updating with new trackers. And so you can fall into that at any point if you are an analytics or a data provider, for example, that is looking to track users and provide data to advertisers. So Chrome third-party cookie deprecation aside, third-party cookies are already being severely restricted across other browsers. We've linked off to cookiestatus.com here, which is a great website to keep you up to date on everything happening with major browsers in terms of their privacy features. Moving into some implications, and when we think about implications and how we're using cookies, both first and third party, it's really mainly for three things: audience targeting, retargeting, and conversion tracking. And so we'll first start here with audience targeting. And if you're asking yourself, what does everything that Jack and I have discussed here mean for you? Hopefully some of these slides will be able to answer that for you as well. So in general, for data loss that you might expect to see as it relates to audience targeting, your options for audience targeting might be forced to become broader. So I remember back in a couple of years ago where Meta had started to take away some of those targeting opportunities that were very niche and very specific and rolled those users up into more broad categories. So for example, if you're a a marketer of graduate business programs, and you want to reach people who are researching the GRE, you used to be able to do that, and now, or maybe in the future, you might not be able to. You might have to instead find a broader category of people who are interested in business school rather than people who are specifically researching GRE. You also have users on iOS or third-party cookie deprecated browsers, like we talked about, that might be in your audiences for a shorter amount of time. So as an individual, you get into an audience by browsing specific websites. So like Jack said, he's looking for a chicken coop. He's probably going to fall into a Amazon ads audience, people interested in chickens, or people homesteading or farming, for example, right? But once those cookies are deprecated and are only lasting for 24 hours or less, he can only be in those audiences for that amount of time where that cookie is lasting. So what can you do about it? Well, you can kind of go back to some of the old school methods of targeting to ensure that you're reaching the people that you want in the broadest sense possible. So think of your display campaigns, where rather than focusing on individual audience targeting, maybe you go back to thinking about what kind of content is my audience reading? And you can think about targeting on a contextual or a keyword level to put your ads next to content that you think your audience is going to be reading. Or on Meta or LinkedIn, you can target based on volunteered user profile data. So on LinkedIn, when you sign up for an account, you put in your job experience, where you worked, how long you worked there, what your skills that you have are, where you went to school. And those are all targetable things that is zero-party data for LinkedIn that you as an advertiser can use to reach individuals. You can also focus on your creative and use broader audiences. So creative is going to be hugely important. I know you've heard from some of our colleagues today, if you joined in those other sessions, about creative and how to tell stories with creative. And as you lean into machine learning and some of those broader audiences, creative is going to be the thing to set you apart and reach your audience. As we talked about earlier, maximizing your zero-party and first-party data gathering. So optimize your website for conversions by trying to gather as much zero-party and first-party data as you can. Entice your website users to give you their email by incentivizing application fee waivers or gating content, et cetera. And then some of these other solutions that I mentioned that Google has been working on, one would be the Topics API. So when that does become available, when third-party cookies are deprecated in Chrome, that would be another option to lean into for audience targeting. On the retargeting side of things, what should you expect for data loss? Well, with just third-party cookie deprecation in mind, there should not be significant audience size loss due to third-party cookies, but there very well could be because of first-party cookie deprecation from other browsers like Safari and Brave, like we talked about earlier. Since those are being restricted, you may only be able to be in those in those remarketing audiences for a shorter amount of time. And your campaign reach may also decline. So even if your audience sizes don't decline, your ability to reach those users might be restricted because when you're using that first-party cookie to reach them through retargeting on other sites, such as weather.com, then that's used in a third-party context. To help you through this, think about a multi-channel approach to retargeting. So don't retarget just on Google or just using display, but think about cross-channel through Meta, LinkedIn, YouTube, PPC, display your zero or first-party data, hitting them with email marketing as well. And there will be a new API-based solution coming from Google when the Chrome third-party cookies are deprecated as well. There'll be an API-based method called Protected Audience API, and that will be something to look out for to potentially use too. Here's just a quick diagram, kind of explaining a little bit more detail that first-party cookie becoming a third-party cookie in the context of retargeting. Jack explained this a little bit earlier, but if you're a user coming to university.edu, a first-party cookie will be stored on your browser. But then as you navigate to that other site, news.com, that first-party cookie that we have on you, that Google has on you, for example, is trying to serve you an ad in a third-party context. And that's cross-site, and that is, again, becoming now a third-party cookie. And that's where some of those browsers that do not allow them, such as Safari, you may not be able to reach them. And then lastly here for implications, conversion reporting. So you might expect or might have already seen some conversion loss with multi-touch data or even longer attribution windows. So maybe not necessarily for your inquiries where you're typically seeing a click on an ad and then almost an immediate conversion point, but some of those longer window conversions like maybe visit registrations or definitely application submissions, you might start to see some conversion loss there. But again, not because of third-party cookies, mainly just due to the first-party cookie window deprecation from other browsers. And conversion tracking used to be more based on observed data. And as Jackie mentioned earlier, it's definitely moving more towards observed and modeled, now allowing you to the tech providers to use many different machine learning and AI data points to make up for the conversion loss that is caused because of any cookie deprecation. So what can you do about it here? Set up enhanced conversions and offline conversions, more data that you can pass in about the people who are converting, the more likely you are to be able to report on ad effectiveness. You can lean into already existing advanced modeling techniques to help estimate total conversions as well. And you can also consider some of those cookie-free measurement techniques. So not just offline conversion, but others like incrementality testing or marketing mix modeling that don't use any cookies or any PII and are simply using statistical analysis to determine what is working for your marketing efforts. Now we'll talk a little bit more and kind of sum up of how you can get prepared. First thing, again, to reiterate, reevaluate your mindset and best practices. Think privacy first. That's what consumers are expecting and your website users and prospective students are expecting. So when you provide them that privacy first experience, they trust you more. Focus on your zero-party and first-party data collection. Think about your digital marketing reporting metrics and how they may be changing or have changed from those more observed and deterministic conversion points that we're talking about now to more modeled versions of those. And lean into machine learning for any of your audience targeting or your bidding optimizations as well. Like we've said a few times today, speak to your legal counsel on what is exactly needed for your institution from a legal standpoint to comply with any regulations. But either way, implement some type of consent banner. It's going to be required as part of the Digital Markets Act to reach EU users, or already is required. But it's also, again, going back to that point of building trust. And you can do this with a consent management platform, a customer data platform, a CMS plugin, or something that you build on your own. Build your zero-party, first-party, or second-party lead generation strategies. Consult with your developer, like Jack said, about understanding which of your cookies on your website are third-party context and trying to change those to first-party. And Jack will talk a little bit lastly about ensuring digital marketing campaigns are set up for success.
Right. So probably the first thing to talk about here is using Google Tag Manager for tag management. When by using Google Tag Manager, the way that the codes are configured, it allows some of the platform cookies to be placed in a first-party context. Some of the older implementation, which is kind of classic custom HTML, tends to implement that more as a third-party content. And so using Google Tag Manager can help really streamline all that and can improve page performance. Be sure to implement consent mode in Google Tag Manager if applicable. Consent mode, again, is needed for if you need to comply to the Digital Markets Act, so make sure that that is configured properly in GTM. Be sure to set up any enhanced and offline conversions if that makes the most sense for your business. You can pretty easily change your meta pixel to be using first-party cookies as opposed to third-party cookies. You can also update your LinkedIn Insight tag to use first-party cookies as well. If you're running any campaigns through Google Campaign Manager or DV360, then you can just be sure to turn on the enhanced attribution settings and turn on auto tagging. Finally, if you are spending a lot of time in GA4, then make sure you configure that to be able to model the sessions where consent was denied. So all of this is really to set you up for success as much as possible, making sure that that all targeting and conversion and reporting options are as the best they can be in a world where cookies are slowly being deprecated.
Thank you, Jack and Anderson. We are just about out of time. There's one question that I might be able to answer quickly. Oh, we're out. Sorry. It's 4:45. Chris, we will answer your questions after the session. We can respond there. But thank you so much, Jack and Anderson. We have a really great last session starting in about 15 minutes. It is called Gen Z and Gen Alpha. Who are they and how to reach them? It's at 5 p.m. Eastern time. Please head back to the agenda and move up to attend. And thank you all for joining our session today.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.